Welcome to the Hodja on Architecture podcast. The Origins of Architecture, Chapter 9, Vernacular Before Architects. In the previous chapter, we explored how increasingly dense settlements evolved into proto-cities, transforming architecture into interconnected systems of movement, collective life, and spatial complexity. We examined how settlements gradually came to function as integrated environments rather than collections of isolated structures. In this chapter, we move from settlement systems to environmental intelligence itself. The discussion shifts from density to adaptation, from proto-urban organization to local knowledge, and from architecture as construction to architecture as a response to place. Today, vernacular architecture is often described as architecture without architects. While this definition is widely used, it can also be misleading because it emphasizes who was absent rather than what was present. The true significance of vernacular architecture lies not in the absence of professional designers, but in the presence of accumulated environmental knowledge. Vernacular architecture represents one of humanity's earliest and most successful attempts to negotiate the relationship between climate, material, landscape, culture, and habitation. This makes vernacular architecture particularly relevant to a discussion of architectural origins. Long before architectural professions existed, human communities were already developing sophisticated spatial responses to environmental conditions. These responses did not emerge through formal theory, technical manuals, or institutional education. Instead, they developed gradually through observation, experimentation, adaptation, and collective memory. Architecture became a form of environmental learning. At its core, vernacular architecture begins with a simple question: how can human beings live successfully within a particular environment? The answer differs dramatically from one region to another because environmental conditions differ as well. A structure appropriate for a desert may fail in a tropical climate. A building suited to mountainous terrain may become ineffective in a wet coastal landscape. Architecture therefore emerges not through universal solutions, but through local adaptation. This adaptive logic explains why vernacular architecture exhibits such extraordinary diversity across the world. Different climates, materials, cultural practices, and economic conditions generate different architectural forms. Yet beneath this diversity lies a shared principle. Vernacular environments are shaped by responsiveness rather than abstraction. They evolve through direct engagement with environmental realities rather than through detached formal experimentation. The relationship between architecture and climate is particularly important within this process. Before mechanical heating, cooling, ventilation, and artificial environmental control became widespread, survival depended heavily on passive adaptation. Building orientation, wall thickness, roof forms, openings, material selection, and settlement organization all functioned as environmental strategies. Architecture became a mediator between the body and climate. This environmental intelligence developed over generations. Communities observed which materials performed successfully, which construction techniques endured, and which spatial arrangements supported comfort and survival. Successful solutions were repeated, refined, and transmitted across time. Architectural knowledge therefore accumulated collectively rather than individually. The environment itself became a teacher. Material selection also reveals the sophistication of vernacular thinking. Early builders rarely imported materials from great distances because construction largely depended on local availability. Earth, timber, stone, reeds, bamboo, thatch, snow, and animal products all became architectural resources depending on regional conditions. Vernacular architecture therefore emerged directly from the material possibilities of place. This close relationship between architecture and materiality produced highly efficient forms of construction. Buildings often utilize resources requiring relatively little transportation, processing, or environmental disruption. Construction systems evolved through practical necessity rather than ideological sustainability. Yet many vernacular environments achieved forms of ecological balance that contemporary architecture continues attempting to rediscover. The relationship between vernacular architecture and culture is equally significant. Environmental adaptation alone does not explain architectural form. Human values, traditions, rituals, family structures, economic activities, and social organization all influence spatial arrangements. Vernacular architecture therefore reflects not only environmental conditions but also cultural ways of life. Place and culture become inseparable. This reveals why vernacular architecture should not be understood merely as primitive construction. Such interpretations underestimate the complexity of accumulated local knowledge. Vernacular environments often embody centuries of environmental observation, material experimentation, and social adaptation. They represent sophisticated systems of knowledge embedded within architecture itself. The absence of formal architects does not imply the absence of design. On the contrary, vernacular environments demonstrate that design can emerge collectively through long-term cultural processes. Decisions regarding orientation, enclosure, circulation, construction, and environmental response continue to be made. The difference lies in how knowledge is generated and transmitted. Design becomes distributed across communities rather than concentrated within individuals. This collective dimension connects vernacular architecture directly to the themes explored throughout this season. Settlements, agriculture, walls, houses, public spaces, monuments, and proto-cities all emerged through gradual processes of adaptation and collective learning. Vernacular architecture represents the continuation of this logic. Architecture develops not through isolated invention, but through cumulative interaction between humans and environments. The significance of vernacular architecture extends beyond historical interest. Contemporary societies increasingly confront environmental challenges, including climate change, resource depletion, ecological instability, and rapid urbanization. Many of these challenges raise questions remarkably similar to those faced by earlier communities. How can architecture respond to environmental conditions rather than ignore them? How can buildings operate with greater efficiency and resilience? How can settlements remain connected to local realities? These questions help explain the continuing relevance of vernacular thinking. The goal is not to copy historical forms uncritically, nor to romanticize the past. Rather, vernacular architecture demonstrates principles of adaptation, responsiveness, and environmental integration that remain valuable today. The lessons lie less in specific buildings than in the logic that produced them. This logic also challenges the assumption that technological advancement automatically produces superior architecture. Modern technologies undoubtedly provide extraordinary capabilities, yet technology alone does not guarantee environmental responsiveness. Vernacular environments remind us that successful architecture depends not merely on technical power, but on understanding the relationships among climate, materials, culture, and human habitation. In this sense, vernacular architecture remains surprisingly future-oriented. The architectural questions faced by early communities continue reappearing in new forms today. Environmental uncertainty, resource management, climatic adaptation, and sustainable habitation remain central concerns. The future may therefore require not the abandonment of vernacular principles, but their reinterpretation within contemporary conditions. This possibility becomes particularly fascinating when considered beyond Earth itself. If future human settlements emerge on the Moon, Mars, or other extraterrestrial environments, they will confront unfamiliar climates, material limitations, and environmental constraints. The first successful extraterrestrial settlements may therefore resemble vernacular environments more closely than highly standardized architectural systems. They too will require adaptation to local conditions, available resources, and environmental realities. The history of vernacular architecture therefore extends beyond the past. It represents a recurring architectural condition that emerges whenever humans must negotiate habitation directly with environmental circumstances. Vernacular thinking is not merely a historical category, it is an enduring architectural strategy. Vernacular before architects ultimately reveals that architecture did not originate solely through professional expertise. Long before architectural disciplines, institutions, and theories existed, human communities were already developing sophisticated environmental responses through collective observation and adaptation. Architecture emerged not only from construction, settlement, or monumentality, but from the continuous effort to belong within a particular place. In the next chapter, we will conclude this season by reflecting on a final question. Who were the first architects? We will examine how the entire story explored throughout these 10 chapters challenges modern assumptions about authorship, design, and architectural creation. The discussion will shift from environmental intelligence to collective intelligence, from vernacular adaptation to communal creativity, and from architecture as a profession to architecture as a shared human endeavor. Because before architects existed as individuals, architecture was already a collective act of civilization. This concludes Chapter 9 of The Origins of Architecture, Vernacular Before Architects. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.